My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 3 years, my family has treated me like a charity case. Every family dinner was a trial, and I was the one being judged for walking away from a stable job to chase a dream they called an expensive hobby. That night, when my father slid a $50 bill across the table and told me to buy a decent outfit for a job interview, I thought I had reached my breaking point. I thought the weight of their disappointment would finally crush me. What they didn't know was that in my pocket, my phone was buzzing with news that was about to shatter their entire world and expose the fragile foundation upon which their idea of success was built. If you've ever felt doubted by the very people who should have been your biggest fans, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you about the phone call that changed everything, hit that like and subscribe button to hear more real-life stories about proving your worth when no one else believes in you. Before I became the family disappointment, I was their pride and joy, or at least a version of it they found acceptable. I had done everything right. I'd followed the blueprint for a successful life that they had laid out since I was a child. I graduated with honors in marketing from a good university, landed a secure job with benefits at a major ad agency in the city, and had a cute little apartment with a fig tree in the corner that I proudly paid for myself. But there was always an unspoken, unshakable truth in my family. I wasn't Daniel. Daniel, my younger brother, was the golden child. 2 years my junior, he was a lawyer, and in the eyes of my parents, Richard and Helen, he was the personification of success and stability. His path was a straight, glistening line, while mine was always seen as a meandering, uncertain trail. Every one of Daniel's accomplishments, from winning a debate tournament in high school to making the dean's list to passing the bar, was celebrated with grand parties and boastful phone calls to relatives. My milestones, like my first promotion or a successful campaign I'd led, earned polite, perfunctory nods. "That's nice, dear," was the common refrain. This long-standing wound wasn't a single deep cut, but the accumulation of 1,000 tiny paper cuts over 32 years. I remember when I was 12, I won first place in the state science fair. My project was an intricate model of a solar-powered water purification system, something I'd poured 6 months of my life into, spending hours in the library and sketching designs in my notebooks. I was bursting with pride. That same weekend, Daniel had a semifinal soccer game. My parents went to his game. "You understand, Clara," my mother had said, her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt dismissive. "The whole team is counting on Daniel. It's a team sport. Your science fair is more of an individual thing." I stood alone on that stage to accept my award, a blue ribbon and a small trophy, looking out into a crowd of beaming families and seeing only an empty space where mine should have been. I learned a lesson that day. My individual achievements would always be secondary to his role as part of a winning team. This pattern continued into adulthood. When Christmas came around, the disparity was almost comical. One year, after Daniel had graduated from law school, their gift to him was a check for $10,000 to help with a down payment on a future home. My gift was a set of expensive-looking but ultimately cheap kitchen knives and a self-help book titled Dressing for Success. The unspoken message was clear. We invest in his future. You need to fix your present. When I decided to leave my soulless but stable advertising job, it was because of a fire inside me I could no longer ignore. The corporate world felt like a cage painted gold. I was good at it, but it was hollowing me out. My idea for ConnectSphere wasn't just a whim. It was born from my own frustrations as a creative person trying to find collaborators. It was designed to be a digital ecosystem where writers could find illustrators, musicians could find filmmakers, and coders could find designers. It was a platform built on the belief that creation is better together. It was my calling. I presented it to my parents with a meticulously crafted 40-page business plan. I hoped, with all my heart, that they would see the passion and the potential. Instead, they saw only risk. "You're quitting a job with a 401 kelvins?" my father asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "For some app when there are 1 million of them out there? It's a fantasy, Clara." My mother was softer, but her words cut just as deep. "Daniel just made junior partner," she'd said. "He's looking at buying a house in the suburbs. That's the path adults take. We just want you to be secure." Their definition of security was my definition of a slow death. So I took the leap. I used my life savings. When that ran out, I sold my apartment, my beautiful little sanctuary with the fig tree, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. The pink-flowered wallpaper I had picked out when I was 10 was still on the walls, a constant, mocking reminder of my perceived regression. "It's just temporary," I told them, and myself. Temporary turned into 2.5 years of quiet humiliations. In that time, ConnectSphere grew from a concept into a functioning platform with over 50,000 active users. We weren't profitable yet, but we were making waves. Tech blogs were starting to notice us. We had a small, brilliant team of 5, all working remotely, and an incredible assistant named Jessica who was my rock. But in the echo chamber of my parents' house, none of that mattered. All they saw was their 2-year-old daughter, living under their roof with no salary, constantly glued to her laptop. I wasn't a CEO. I was a squatter with a hobby. They saw my presence as a burden and my career as a joke, and they never missed an opportunity to remind me of it. I tried to endure it all, convinced that one day I would prove them wrong, but I had no idea how close I was to breaking, or how spectacular the fallout would be. The catalyst wasn't a sudden, explosive event, but a scheduled one, something I'd been dreading for weeks. The obligatory Sunday family dinner. These dinners had become a ritual of quiet torture. But this one was different. This was a command performance. Daniel and his wife, Sarah, were coming. My mother had made it clear this was a special occasion, which was code for putting the stark comparison between her 2 children on full, glorious display for everyone to witness. The entire week leading up to it was a masterclass in passive aggression. A palpable tension, thick and suffocating, filled the house. My mother was a whirlwind of activity, not of joyful preparation, but of anxious, pointed effort. She spent 2 days polishing the silver we never used, and another deep cleaning the living room, as if preparing for a state visit. She planned a menu composed entirely of Daniel's favorite dishes, the rich, heavy foods she knew I found overwhelming. "I'm making my beef Wellington," she announced to me, not looking up from her recipe book. "I know it's not your favorite, Clara, but Daniel works so hard he deserves a treat." The implication was clear. His hard work was real and deserved rewarding. Mine was not. Meanwhile, in my separate reality, that week was the most critical of my entire professional life. After months of grueling, secret negotiations, we were in the final, nail-biting stages of an acquisition talk with Innovatech Dynamics, a Silicon Valley behemoth. I couldn't breathe a word of it to anyone. Strict NDAs meant my own team only knew we were in partnership talks. The pressure was immense. I was living a double life. By day, I was the unemployed daughter being sighed at for using too much Wi-Fi. By night, I was on encrypted video calls with a squadron of corporate lawyers fighting for the future of the company I had bled for. This deal wasn't just about money. It was about validation on a scale I had barely dared to dream of. It was my entire life's work culminating in a single moment. On Sunday morning, the pressure cooker intensified. I was on an emergency video call with Innovatech's legal team, huddled in my car parked 2 blocks away from the house, just to get a sliver of privacy. The windows were fogged up from my anxious breathing. My father had already interrupted me twice that morning, once to ask if I was ever going to get off the computer and help, the second time to just stand in my doorway and sigh loudly. Clara, we think we can get this finalized tonight. The lead counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Mr. Sterling, said through my laptop speaker. Their board is convening for a final vote this evening. There are just a few last details they need to approve. Be ready. This could move very fast. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tonight, after 3 years of grinding, it could all be over tonight. I thanked him, ended the call, and leaned my head against the steering wheel, my mind a chaotic swirl of terror and exhilaration. I looked back at my parents' house, a pristine prison where the preparations for the Daniel show were in full swing, and the chasm between my two worlds felt impossibly wide. When I walked back inside, my mother intercepted me at the door, a dish towel in her hand and a frown on her face. Where have you been? Daniel and Sarah will be here in an hour, and you're still in your sweatpants. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my worn-out college sweatshirt with a look of pure disgust. For heaven's sake, Clara, can you at least try to look like you have some self-respect? I just nodded, a hollow feeling in my chest. I was too emotionally drained to argue. I trudged upstairs to my room, the pink-flowered museum of my childhood, and picked out a simple but clean outfit. When I looked in the mirror, I saw an exhausted woman, the dark circles under her eyes telling a story of relentless hours and sleepless nights, a story no one in this house cared to read. Just before the doorbell rang, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. They're in the final meeting. Could be news in the next few hours. Hang in there, boss. You're almost there. I clutched the phone, her words a tiny anchor in the storm. When the doorbell chimed, I took one last deep breath, painted a weak smile on my face, and descended the stairs to face my own personal firing squad. The dinner began with the usual pomp and circumstance reserved for my brother. Daniel and Sarah were greeted at the door with hugs and exclamations of delight. My father Richard opened an expensive bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion, a phrase he only ever used when Daniel was present. My mother, Helen, fawned over Sarah's new dress and launched into a breathless series of questions about Daniel's latest case at his prestigious law firm. I sat at the table, a polite smile frozen on my face, feeling like a piece of furniture they were obligated to dust off for company. The escalation, as always, started subtly, a series of microaggressions designed to chip away at my composure. So, Clara, my father began, turning to me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, the one that always preceded a criticism disguised as a question. How is that little computer project of yours coming along? Connected anyone with anyone important yet? The sarcasm was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Daniel let out a condescending chuckle, swirling the red wine in his glass. Dad, you have to use the right terminology. It's a startup. It sounds much more legitimate that way, doesn't it? He winked at me, as if we were in on a shared joke at my expense. I felt a familiar heat creep up my neck, but I fought to keep my voice steady. It's going very well, thank you, I said, looking my father in the eye. We actually just passed 75,000 active users, and we're starting to get some significant media attention. Oh, media attention? My mother chirped, her voice a high, sickly, sweet soprano. That's lovely, dear. Truly. But does attention pay the bills? I only ask because... Well, Richard and I were just looking at the credit card statement, and we saw that gas purchase from last week. We're happy to help, of course, but we worry. It was a masterfully executed blow. It wasn't just a low blow. It was a public shaming. A week prior, my personal card had been unexpectedly frozen due to a fraud alert after I'd paid a large international server bill. I'd used their card for a single tank of gas and paid them back in cash within hours, explaining the situation. But the way she presented it, in front of Daniel and Sarah, made me sound like an irresponsible, financially destitute child. That was a one-time emergency because my card was frozen, and I paid you back immediately, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot stone in my stomach. "Oh, of course you did, dear," she said, patting my hand across the table, a gesture of pure theatrical condescension. "Don't be so sensitive." Sarah, Daniel's wife, saw her opening and dove in. She was an expert at delivering insults wrapped in a bow of feigned sympathy. "I honestly think what Clara's doing is so brave," she said, directing her performance to my mother. "Just dropping everything to follow a passion. I could never. I'm just too practical. I like the security of a steady paycheck and a 401 kelvins." The subtext screamed, "I'm a responsible adult, and you are a reckless child." The tension continued to mount with every course. The main topic of conversation became Daniel and Sarah's ambitious plan to remodel their kitchen. They unfurled blueprints on the table, detailing custom cabinetry and marble countertops. My parents listened with rapt attention, their faces glowing with pride. Then, my father made the announcement. "Helen and I have decided we want to help you kids out. We're going to give you a $50,000 interest-free loan to make sure you get exactly what you want." "Oh, Richard, you shouldn't have," Sarah gasped, though her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Nonsense," my father boomed, beaming at Daniel. "Investing in a solid asset like your home is always a wise decision. It's about building for the future." The hypocrisy was suffocating. They would happily sink a fortune into granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, a monument to Daniel's success, but they viewed my company, my actual future, my life's work as a black hole for money. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to change the subject, asking Sarah about her job, anything to steer the conversation away from this painful comparison. But Daniel, sensing his advantage, brought it right back around. "You know, Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair with an air of smug magnanimity, "my firm is hiring some paralegals. The starting pay isn't bad, and the benefits are fantastic. If you ever get tired of playing entrepreneur, I could put in a word with HR. You'd mostly be doing filing and research, but it's a foot in the door to the real world." The offer was a dagger, expertly twisted. It was a public declaration of my failure, delivered with a veneer of brotherly concern. He was offering me a subordinate role in his world, a world where I would be small and safe, and forever in his shadow. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes and hated myself for my own weakness. I would not give them the satisfaction. "Thanks for the offer, Daniel," I managed, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "But I'm building something of my own. I believe in it." "Belief doesn't pay the rent, sis," he smirked, taking a triumphant sip of his wine. My eyes darted around the table, searching for a single ally, a single flicker of support. My mother was meticulously cutting her beef, refusing to meet my gaze. My father just shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment etched on his face, as if my refusal to accept my station as a failure was my greatest flaw. In that desperate moment, a memory surfaced, a lifeline. It was the voice of my old college mentor, Professor Peterson. I had called him a few months ago during a particularly low point. After I'd walked him through the ConnectSphere platform, he'd said, "Clara, don't let anyone tell you what you're doing is insignificant. The metrics are impressive. The user engagement is real. You're not just building an app, you're building a community. This has legs. Your persistence is going to pay off in ways you can't even imagine." His voice, the confirmation from an objective, respected outsider, was a shield. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't delusional. They were the ones who couldn't see. "Excuse me," I mumbled, pushing my chair back. "I need to use the restroom." I fled the dining room and locked myself in the bathroom, leaning against the door as if to hold back the tide of their judgment. I stood at the sink, gripping the cold porcelain, and stared at my reflection. My phone buzzed. Another text from Jessica. "Still waiting. I know this is hard. Stay strong." I splashed cold water on my face, took a ragged breath, and tried to piece my composure back together. I just had to get through the rest of the night. I walked back to the table, completely unaware that the final, soul-crushing blow was still to come. When I returned to the dining room, the air was thick with a conspiratorial silence. My brief absence had clearly been used as an intermission to dissect the Clara problem more openly. The conversation died the second I stepped into the room, their heads snapping up with feigned innocence. "Oh, there you are," my mother said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Your father and Daniel were just saying that we're all very worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated, my voice flat as I resumed my seat. The word felt like a lie, a more palatable term for what they really felt. Embarrassment. "Yes, worried," my father said, setting his fork and knife down with a definitive clatter that echoed in the quiet room. He leaned forward, adopting the tone he used for delivering life lessons, a tone dripping with condescension. "You're 32 years old, Clara. 32. You have no savings to speak of. No retirement plan, no stable relationship on the horizon. You are living in your childhood bedroom, under our roof. Can't you see that this is a problem? I am building a company that has the potential to be worth millions of dollars," I countered, the defensive edge in my voice sharper than I intended. "That is my retirement plan. That is my future. It takes time." My father let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound devoid of any humor, a sound that dismissed my entire existence. A potential worth of millions? That's Fantasyland talk, Clara. Potential doesn't pay a mortgage. It's just monopoly money in your little tech bubble. And then it happened. The final, unforgivable act. It wasn't a shout or an insult. It was so much worse. It was a gesture of profound theatrical pity designed to utterly break me. My father reached into the back pocket of his trousers, pulled out his worn leather wallet, and deliberately slowly extracted a single, crumpled $50 bill. He smoothed it out on the table with his thumb and then, with a flick of his wrist, slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped just short of my plate. "Here," he said, his voice dropping to a somber, almost funereal tone. "Take this. Tomorrow, I want you to go out and buy yourself a professional outfit. Something a grown woman would wear to a job interview. Maybe if you look the part, someone will finally give you a real job." The room fell utterly silent. Even Daniel, my chief tormentor, seemed momentarily stunned by the raw cruelty of the gesture. The $50 bill sat there between us, a green and white flag of my complete and utter humiliation. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol. It was a declaration that my 3 years of 17-hour days, of relentless stress, of pouring my soul into my work, were worth nothing. It said, "You are a child. You are incompetent. You are our failure, our burden, our charity project." I stared at the bill. The world seemed to warp and slow down. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a dull roar that drowned out everything else. I could feel their collective gaze on me, waiting, expecting my reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted a dramatic outburst. They wanted me to break, to finally concede defeat and perhaps, with a trembling hand, shamefully accept their pathetic handout. But something else happened inside me. The years of accumulated hurt, the sadness, the frustration, it didn't boil over into anger. Instead, it underwent a strange alchemy. It compressed and cooled, hardening into something solid and clear and unbreakable. It was an epiphany. In that searing moment of clarity, I finally understood. I would never win their approval. There was no metric of success I could ever achieve that would change their narrative of me. They had cast me as the failure in their family drama, and they would cling to that role for me because it made their own choices. And Daniel's seem all the more brilliant. I had spent my entire life trying to win a game that was rigged from the start. And in that moment, I quit the game. I lifted my head, my eyes meeting my father's. The tremor that had plagued my voice all evening was gone, replaced by a chilling, quiet calm. "I don't need your money," I said, my voice soft but unwavering, as I pushed the $50 bill back toward him. And as my fingers left the bill, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A long, insistent buzz. It wasn't a text alert. It was a call. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Fate, it turned out, had a spectacular and brutal sense of timing. My secret weapon wasn't some grand, premeditated scheme for revenge. In truth, I never had a plan to confront them in such a dramatic fashion. My plan had always been far simpler, and in retrospect, heartbreakingly naive. Work relentlessly, achieve undeniable success, and hope that one day that success would finally speak for itself. I had harbored a fantasy where I'd casually mention a feature in Forbes or a profitable quarter, and their eyes would finally open with understanding and respect. I hadn't yet grasped that their blindness wasn't an affliction. It was a choice. My real secret weapon was the truth. A volatile, life-altering truth that I'd been legally bound to keep under wraps for months by a fortress of non-disclosure agreements. A truth that was, at that very moment, preparing to detonate. The acquiring company, Innovatech Dynamics, wasn't just one of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. They were pioneers in AI-driven analytics. They weren't just interested in ConnectSphere's growing user base or its brand recognition within the creative community. They were after its soul, the proprietary algorithm I had spent 2 years developing and perfecting. It was a predictive engine, a complex piece of code that could analyze millions of data points to forecast collaborative trends and identify synergistic partnerships between creators before they even knew they needed each other. It was the crown jewel, my life's most important work, and Innovatech wanted it to power the next generation of their enterprise software. The negotiations had been a war of attrition. Their team was a phalanx of razor-sharp corporate lawyers and seasoned M&A specialists from Goldman Sachs. They were polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. They tried to undervalue us, to intimidate me, to drown me in paperwork. But I wasn't alone. In a stroke of incredible luck, my old mentor, Professor Peterson, had connected me with Eleanor Vance, a legendary tech lawyer who had famously represented David against Goliath in several landmark cases. Eleanor saw the power of my algorithm, and more importantly, she saw the fire in me. She agreed to represent me on contingency, taking a percentage of the final deal, a testament to her belief in our success. Together, we fought them for every clause, every subsection, every single zero. My counterplan, therefore, was never about my family. It was a plan for the survival and success of my company and my team. The entire process was conducted in the deepest secrecy. I took calls at 3 a.m. from public parks to accommodate the time difference. I used encrypted messaging apps. I told my team we were in late-stage partnership talks to explain my frequent distraction and odd hours. A colossal understatement. Only Eleanor and I knew the true nature of the deal. A full acquisition. The secrecy was a crushing burden. There were countless nights I'd lie in my childhood bed, listening to the sounds of the house, and I would want to scream, "You have no idea what I'm doing! You have no idea how hard I'm fighting!" But I couldn't. A single careless word could have violated the NDA and scuttled the entire deal, destroying everything. So I endured. I swallowed the taunts. I absorbed the condescension. And I channeled all that pain and rage into my work, focusing on the finish line. As I sat at that dinner table, my father's $50 bill lying between us like a verdict, my plan fundamentally changed. It was no longer about patiently waiting for the right moment to share my success. It was about making them witness it, in real time, as a direct rebuttal to their cruelty. The call from Jessica was the spark in the powder keg. I knew our protocol inside and out. For weeks, updates had come via carefully worded encrypted texts. They're reviewing the final draft. Eleanor is on a call with their counsel. A phone call at this hour, on a Sunday, meant only one thing. It was the signal we had agreed upon. It meant the vote was over. The documents were signed. The wire transfer was being initiated. It was done. I looked at the buzzing phone on the table, Jessica's name glowing on the screen. It felt like a beacon from another universe, a universe where I was respected, valued, and successful. My entire family stared at it, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Aren't you going to answer that?" my mother asked, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Honestly, Clara, it's incredibly rude to take phone calls at the dinner table." "I think," I said, my voice steady and clear, a stark contrast to the frantic beating of my heart. "I need to take this one." "Who could possibly be so important they can't wait?" Daniel scoffed, rolling his eyes. "One of your users having a crisis over which font to use for their online poetry blog?" I didn't dignify his comment with a response. I just picked up the phone, my gaze locking with my father's over the top of the screen. I let the silence stretch for a beat. Then, I hit the answer button and deliberately, purposefully, tapped the speakerphone icon. The silence in the room became absolute, thick with anticipation. "Clara?" Jessica's voice came through, crisp and professional, but I could hear the tremor of suppressed adrenaline just beneath the surface. "I'm here, Jessica," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm with my family." "What's up?" I asked the question, though I already knew the answer. I wanted them to hear it from an outside voice. I wanted the validation to be undeniable, irrefutable, and delivered with the cold, hard authority of a legal proceeding. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your dinner, Clara," Jessica said, her voice a carefully controlled instrument of professionalism, but I could hear the smile in her words. "But I have news. Big news. Mr. Sterling from Innovatec's legal team just called me directly. The board at Innovatec held their final vote 30 minutes ago. It was unanimous." A pregnant pause hung in the air. Over the speaker, I could hear Jessica take a sharp, ecstatic breath before she delivered the final blow. "They approved it, Clara. The deal is done. All contingencies have been waived. The final signed offer is for $92 million. Silence. The silence that fell over that dining room was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical entity, a vacuum that sucked all the air, all the arrogance, all the smug certainty out of the room. It was a heavy, crushing weight. And it was beautiful. $92 million. The number wasn't just spoken. It was unleashed. It hung in the air, shimmering with consequence, an undetonated bomb that had just been armed. I slowly scanned the faces around the table, watching the battlefield of their expressions in slow motion. The first casualty was Daniel's smugness. It didn't just fade, it shattered. As a lawyer, he understood the finality of the words, "Deal is done" and "signed offer." The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. His mouth hung slightly open, his wineglass frozen halfway to his lips. The golden child had been tarnished. Next was my mother. Her face was a kaleidoscope of conflicting emotions. First, utter confusion, as if she were trying to process a sentence in a foreign language. Then, her eyes widened in dawning comprehension, darting from the phone to my face and back again, trying to connect the daughter she thought she knew with the impossible number she had just heard. Her carefully constructed facade of pitying concern crumbled, revealing the raw shock beneath. And finally, my father. He was the last to let the reality sink in, his mind clearly fighting against a truth that invalidated his entire worldview. The anger, the disappointment, the paternalistic authority, it all just evaporated from his face. For a moment, there was nothing but a blank void. Then, something new and ugly flickered to life in his eyes. Calculation. Greed. He was looking at me, really looking at me for the first time all night, but he wasn't seeing his daughter. He was seeing a number with 8 zeros. The official press release is going out to the major news wires in the next hour. Jessica's voice continued, a cheerful messenger from a world they couldn't comprehend, slicing through the thick silence. The Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch already have the embargoed story. Your phone is about to become unusable. I just wanted to be the first one to say, congratulations, boss. You did it. You really, really did it. Thank you, Jessica, I said. And my voice, to my own astonishment, was perfectly steady. Thank you for everything. I'll call you back in a bit. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table with a soft, definitive click. The silence rushed back in to fill the void, but this time it was different. It was charged with unspoken questions, with the bitter taste of crow, and with the undeniable reality of a seismic shift in power. My father was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse, broken thing, a pale imitation of his usual booming authority. 92 million? That has to be a joke, right? This is some kind of elaborate prank? No, Dad, I said softly, the words feeling powerful and clean in my mouth. It's not a joke. But how? My mother stammered, her hands fluttering at her throat. Your little app. Your hobby. It wasn't a little app, Mom, I said, finally allowing a hint of the iron I felt in my spine to enter my voice. It was a technology company with valuable proprietary intellectual property, and it was just acquired. Daniel finally found his voice, but it was a reedy, thin sound I'd never heard from him before, laced with the raw, ugly poison of envy. Is all of that money yours? A significant portion, a life-changing amount, goes to my 5 team members and our early angel investors who believed in me when no one else did, I said, making sure to emphasize the last part. But yes, the remainder is mine. After taxes and payouts, it is still a sum that will fundamentally change the rest of my life. And then, exactly as I knew it would, the pivot came. It was so sudden and so transparent it was almost comical. My father's face contorted from disbelief into a wide, grotesque smile. His eyes, which moments before had been filled with contempt, now shone with a terrifying, predatory pride. Clara! My girl, I knew you had it in you. I told you, Helen, didn't I? I always said she was a fighter. I always believed in you. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair slightly as he rounded the table to embrace me. I didn't move a muscle. I sat there, a statue of ice, and let him wrap his arms around my rigid shoulders. The hug felt like a violation. We were always your biggest supporters, you know that, my mother added breathlessly, her smile just as forced, just as false. We pushed you because we knew you had such great potential. It was tough love, that's all. The hypocrisy was so potent, it was almost dizzying. They were attempting to gaslight me, to rewrite years of documented history in the span of 30 seconds. I gently but firmly pushed my father away. I rose to my feet, my movements slow and deliberate. I was in control now. I looked at each of them, my gaze lingering for a moment on each of their shocked, desperate faces. "No," I said, and the single word landed with the force of a gavel. "You didn't believe in me. You never did. You mocked me. You condescended to me. You belittled my work, and you made me feel worthless and small in what was supposed to be my home." I picked up my purse from the floor beside my chair. "Tonight, you don't see your daughter. You see a walking, talking bank account. You see a number, and you want a piece of it." I looked directly at my father. "You can keep the $50, I said, my voice cold and precise. "Consider it an investment in your own financial education. You're going to need it more than I will." I turned my gaze to Daniel. "And thank you for the generous job offer, little brother. It's comforting to know I had a backup plan, but I think I'll be okay." Then I turned and walked toward the front door. Their voices erupted behind me, a chaotic chorus of panic and false endearments. "Clara, wait! Don't be like this! We're family! We can talk about this!" I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob, and turned back for one final, parting shot. They were huddled together, looking small and pathetic and utterly lost, their carefully ordered world in ruins. "A family is supposed to be a safe harbor to chase your dreams from," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity I had never felt before. "Not the storm you're trying to escape. And tonight, you showed me exactly who you are." And with that, I turned the knob, walked out of that house, out from under the crushing weight of their expectations, and stepped into the boundless freedom of my own life. The moment I closed the heavy oak door behind me, the sound of their frantic, pleading voices was severed as if by a knife. I stood on the porch for a long moment, the cool night air a balm on my flushed skin. It smelled clean. It smelled like freedom. My phone, which I had picked up from the table, began to ring and buzz with a furious, relentless energy. Jessica, Eleanor, my lawyer, my ecstatic team members, and then, inevitably, a barrage of calls and texts from my parents and Daniel. I held the power button down and watched the screen go black. Tonight, I answered to no one but myself. I walked past my beat-up sedan without a second glance. I pulled out my new phone, the one the company paid for, and ordered a top-of-the-line black car service. When the gleaming Lincoln arrived moments later, the driver held the door for me. "The Four Seasons, please," I said, my voice steady. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. Checking into the hotel, I was acutely aware that I didn't look the part. I was a woman in a simple dress, with red-rimmed eyes and a worn-out purse. The concierge was professionally discreet, but I saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. I didn't care. I paid for the best suite they had with my corporate card, knowing it was an infinitesimal drop in an ocean of newfound resources. Up in the suite, with its panoramic views of the glittering city harbor, I did the first thing a self-made millionaire should do. I called room service and ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon and a greasy, glorious double cheeseburger with extra fries. And then I sat, alone in the opulent, tomb-like silence of the room, and I finally let myself cry. But these weren't the hot, shameful tears of humiliation from the bathroom earlier. These were different. They were tears of catharsis, of purging. I cried for the 3 years of struggle, for the crushing loneliness, for the woman who had walked into that dinner hoping for a crumb of validation, and for the entirely different woman who had walked out with the whole damn bakery. The next morning, I woke to a new dawn, literally and figuratively. The sun was rising over the water, painting the sky in impossible shades of pink and orange. I turned my phone back on. It was a digital explosion. Over 200 text messages, 90 emails, and 57 missed calls. I methodically deleted the ones from my family without reading them. Their messages had, as I predicted, cycled through the stages of grief, panicked apologies, angry accusations, How could you humiliate us like that? And, finally, emotionally manipulative pleas. Your mother is sick with worry. You're breaking her heart. Instead, I focused on what mattered. I spent the morning on the phone with my team, my true family. I walked each of them through their compensation packages, generous stock options that had just made them all incredibly wealthy in their own right. Their screams of joy, their stammered thanks, their tears of disbelief that was the real validation. We had done it together. The following week was a whirlwind of logistics and liberation. I hired a white glove moving company, instructing them to go to my parents' house, pack every single item from my room, and put it in storage. Do not speak to the homeowners, I told the manager. Your job is to be swift, silent, and thorough. Meanwhile, Jessica, my now indispensable chief of staff, had secured a short-term lease on a breathtaking penthouse apartment for me, a place where I could land while I figured out my next move. The initial fate of my family, from what I pieced together from a concerned aunt who called, was a complete meltdown. They were ostracized in their own minds, cut off from the fortune they felt entitled to. My father left long, rambling voicemails, oscillating between pride and demands, talking about how we needed to manage this new wealth as a family. Daniel sent meticulously drafted emails offering his legal expertise to protect me from the predators who would now be circling. They didn't understand. The biggest predators had been sitting at their own dinner table. I finally responded with a single, lawyer-approved email stating that I needed indefinite space and that any further contact would be considered harassment. For the first time in my life, I had built a wall, and the sense of peace it brought was intoxicating. 10 months can feel like an eternity, or the blink of an eye. The woman looking back at me in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of my brownstones bathroom was a stranger to the person I'd been. The exhaustion that had been etched into my features was gone, replaced by a clarity in my eyes, a calm confidence that comes not from a bank account, but from surviving a trial by fire, and knowing, unequivocally, who you are. My life had been reconstructed from the ground up. At Innovatech Dynamics, I wasn't just an employee, I was a leader. As the vice president of creative innovation, I was given the autonomy and resources to expand the ConnectSphere division, nurturing the community I had built and scaling its technology globally. My work was challenging, fulfilling, and, for the first time, deeply respected. I had purchased a historic brownstone in the city's most beautiful neighborhood. It was a house with character, with high ceilings and old wooden floors that creaked with stories. I spent months designing the interior myself, not with the goal of impressing anyone, but with the sole purpose of creating a space that felt like a reflection of my own soul. It was filled with art from emerging artists I'd met through ConnectSphere, shelves overflowing with books, and a small, private garden on the roof where I drank my coffee every morning. It was my sanctuary. But the most profound changes were internal. The acquisition had given me resources, but I chose to invest them in my own healing. I found a brilliant therapist who helped me unpack the complex trauma of my family dynamic. I learned about golden child syndrome and the role I had been forced to play. I learned to identify a gaslighting statement from a mile away. I learned that setting a boundary wasn't an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation. With this newfound strength, I traveled. I went to Bali and studied meditation. I hiked the treacherous trails of Patagonia and felt small in the face of nature's grandeur. I wandered through the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, crying in front of a Botticelli, not from sadness, but from overwhelming beauty. And my family? Justice, I discovered, is rarely a lightning bolt from the heavens. More often, it's the slow, quiet, inexorable drip of consequences. Cut off from me, and by extension my story and my wealth, their carefully curated world began to show cracks. Daniel was hit the hardest. In his social and professional circles, he had always been the successful one. Now, he was the brother of Clara Mitchell, the tech genius. My success didn't just eclipse his, it invalidated the very foundation of his identity. According to my aunt, he became bitter and resentful. His work at the firm suffered. His relationship with Sarah grew strained under the weight of his profound insecurity. He had built his castle on the flimsy ground of being better than me, and when that ground gave way, his castle crumbled. My parents, in their desperation, tried everything to regain a foothold in my life. The guilt trips continued for months, but their power was gone. They were firing blanks. About 6 months after I left, my father appeared unannounced in the lobby of my office building. He looked 10 years older. The arrogant bluster was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. He came bearing a rehearsed apology, a rambling speech about his own insecurities, his misguided methods of motivation, and how he just wanted his family back together. I listened without interruption in a quiet conference room. When he was finished, his eyes pleading, I spoke. "I appreciate you coming here, Dad. I truly do. But the family you want back was built on a foundation of conditional love and disrespect. That family is gone forever. I am willing, over time, to see if we can build a new relationship. But it will be on new terms. It will be based on honesty, and it will start with therapy." It was a slow, arduous, and painful process. We began family therapy sessions, first with my mother and father, just the three of us. For the first time in my life, the toxic dynamics were laid bare under the unflinching eye of a professional. My mother was forced to confront her blatant favoritism. My father had to acknowledge that he had equated my worth as a human being with my financial status. It was ugly and raw. Daniel, when invited, refused to participate. His pride wouldn't allow it. That decision spoke volumes and created a rift between us that remains to this day. Our relationship is not perfect. It is scarred and requires constant, conscious effort. But for the first time, it is honest. They are learning to see me, not their idea of me. But more importantly, I have stopped needing them to see me at all. I finally see myself. The turning point of my life wasn't the $92 million phone call. It was the moment I found the strength to push a $50 bill back across a dinner table and, in doing so, declare myself priceless. Looking back now, from the quiet sanctuary of my rooftop garden, watching the city lights begin to twinkle like a fallen constellation, I realized that horrible, humiliating dinner was the most important and transformative gift I ever received. It wasn't a gift wrapped in pretty paper and tied with a bow. It was a gift wrapped in cruelty and tied with the coarse rope of familial disappointment. It was a crucible, a trial by fire that I didn't know I needed. It burned away all the illusions I had clung to for 32 years, the illusion that if I just worked hard enough, was successful enough, was good enough, I could finally earn their unconditional love and respect. It forced me to confront a truth I had spent a lifetime avoiding. A truth that is both terrifying and profoundly liberating. You cannot force someone to see your value. You cannot negotiate your worth with people who are determined to undervalue you. You can only choose to see it in yourself, and then build your entire world around that unwavering, unapologetic truth. For so long, my life had been a quiet, desperate performance. I was an actress on a stage they had built, reading from a script they had written. The role they had assigned me was the other child, the reliable but unremarkable one, the one whose purpose was to serve as a backdrop against which the star, my brother Daniel, could shine all the brighter. I had measured my success with their broken ruler, a ruler where the only marks that mattered were the ones Daniel had already surpassed. The prestigious degree, the high-powered job, the conventional symbols of a life well lived. I craved their approval like a sunflower craves the sun, twisting and turning myself in unnatural ways to catch even the faintest ray of their warmth, not realizing that I was my own damn sun, capable of generating all the light and warmth and energy I would ever need. That $50 bill on the table wasn't just an insult. It was my liberation. It was the moment the stage lights went out and the flimsy set came crashing down. In its place was just me, blinking in the sudden, stark reality of it all. The greatest lesson I learned in the past 10 months wasn't about how to build a company or how to negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. The most valuable acquisition I made wasn't a company. It was myself. I learned that boundaries are not the angry, aggressive walls I had always imagined them to be, designed to push people out. They are lovingly, meticulously built fences that protect the sacred garden of your own self-worth. They don't exist to create isolation. They exist to prevent invasion. They are the clear, quiet statement that says, "This is my space. This is where I grow. You are welcome to enter, but you must do so with respect. And you are not permitted to trample the flowers or poison the soil." The $92 million didn't solve my problems. In fact, in many ways, it amplified them, bringing all the latent toxicity of my family dynamic to a boiling point. What the money did provide, however, was the ultimate tool: freedom. It gave me the freedom from obligation, the freedom to walk away without fear of financial ruin. It gave me the resources and the clarity to solve my own problems, to invest in my own healing, and to construct a life on my own terms. The real peace, the kind that settles deep in your bones and allows you to breathe for the first time without a weight on your chest, doesn't come from a bank statement. It comes from waking up every single morning and knowing, with absolute certainty, that the life you are living is one of your own design. It's a life built on a foundation of your own values, your own passions, and gloriously, wonderfully free from the crushing weight of anyone else's judgment or expectation. It's the peace of authorship, of knowing you are holding the pen to your own story. This journey has taught me that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. The cruelty I experienced wasn't born of a passionate dislike, but of a profound indifference to my inner world, my dreams, my struggles. To them, I was a two-dimensional character, a concept, not a person. My success was incomprehensible because it didn't fit the simple, flat character they had written for me. And when the reality of my success became undeniable, they didn't try to understand the character. They just tried to cash the check. I have also learned about the nature of true support. It doesn't always come from the places we are taught to expect it. Sometimes, the people who share your blood are the ones who are quickest to drain it, while strangers, colleagues, and mentors become the family you choose. My team at ConnectSphere, Jessica, my lawyer Eleanor, Professor Peterson, they were my real family during those trying years. They saw my vision when my own parents saw a hobby. They celebrated my small victories when my own brother saw only failures. They invested their time, their talent, and their faith in me. That is a debt I can never repay with money, only with loyalty and a lifelong commitment to paying that support forward. Today, my relationship with my parents is a work in progress, a fragile reconstruction on a newly cleared foundation. Some days, I see glimmers of genuine change. I see my mother trying to ask questions about my work with real curiosity. I see my father bite back a piece of unsolicited advice and offer a simple, "That sounds interesting. Tell me more." These moments are small, but they are seismic shifts from where we were. Other days, the old patterns emerge, the subtle comparisons, the undertone of ownership in their pride. On those days, I lean on the fences I've built, politely but firmly ending the conversation or changing the subject. It's an ongoing negotiation, and perhaps it always will be. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice. It's the practice of accepting what happened, acknowledging the hurt, and choosing not to let it define my present or my future. It's not about absolving them, it's about liberating myself. As for Daniel, we are estranged. He has never been able to face what happened that night, nor his role in the years leading up to it. His silence is a wall I can no longer bring myself to try and climb. I wish him peace, but I have accepted that his journey is not mine to influence. My story was framed by a tech startup and a corporate acquisition, but I know that at its heart, it is a universal experience, a story about breaking free from the narratives that others write for us. It's about the quiet, everyday courage it takes to stand in a room full of people who are looking past you and to not let their lack of vision diminish your own. So, I want to ask you, the person listening right now, what is the $50 bill on your table? What is that gesture, that comment, that long-held belief from someone else that is holding you back, making you feel small? What is the narrative someone else has written for you that you are still living inside of? Have you ever had to fight for recognition of your own worth, whether it was in your family, your career, or your relationships? How did you find the strength to pick up the pen and start writing your own story, in your own words, on your own terms? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your voice, your experience is so incredibly valuable. Reading them means the world to me and to every single person in this community who might be feeling alone in their struggle. Your story could be the lifeline someone else needs to read today. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something within you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss more real-life lessons and stories of empowerment. Your support helps build this community and allows these stories to reach more people. And please, remember to share it with anyone in your life who might need a reminder that their value is not, and never will be, up for debate. Thank you so much for listening, for spending this time with me, and always, always remember this. You are the author, the editor, and the publisher of your own life story. Never let anyone else hold the pen.